Welcome to Lesson 2 of ypww. I do not own the rights to this music. Today's lesson text is coming out of Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 39 to 40. And that reads, Know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, He is God in heaven above, and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. Thou shalt keep therefore his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee this day, that it may go well with thee, and with thy children after thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days upon the earth, which the Lord thy God giveth thee forever. Today's lesson text is Contemplation and the Moral Life. The lesson aim says, to show that reflecting on God is an important feature of the Christian moral life. The memory verse says, Know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, He is God in heaven above, and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. And that's Deuteronomy 4, verse 39, the King James Version. The NIV version says, Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth below. There is no other. The introduction says, Moses knew that the people of God were in a new situation. God took the people to a different level when He brought them out of Egypt and into the promised land. Consequently, this new and exciting development brought into play a host of new problems about how to live as an individual in the community. Life in the promised land will be different from life in Egypt. Moses, therefore, is preparing the people for life in the promised land. Thus, he directs them to center their thoughts on the Lord. Like the children of Israel in our text, the contemporary believer finds him or herself in new situations. He or she often has to wrestle with questions about he or she ought to live his or her life. For example, he or she wonders whether or not to take a new job, leave his or her present church, join a different church, or get married. It therefore seems that saints have many issues to resolve. Even so, we do not need to worry because there is a good foundation upon which to base moral decision making. God is that foundation, for He is in whom the saints can ground their ideas about right and wrong, about what they should or should not do, and about what type of person they should be. Noteworthy, however, is that the people of God must gain as much information as possible about God. This means coming to terms with His nature and His relationship to the world. This is a crucial step in resolving the types of problems that simply arise as a result of being in new situations. The discussion says, the larger literary unit in which Deuteronomy 4, verses 39 to 40 appears, namely Deuteronomy 4, verses 32 to 40, shows the people of God in a new situation. As was said above, Moses reminds the people about how they arrived at this point in their lives. Let's look at Deuteronomy 4, verses 32 through 40. The King James Version. And that reads, For ask now of the days that are past, which were before thee, since the day that God created man upon the earth, and ask from the one side of heaven unto the other, whether there hath been any such thing as this great thing is, or hath been heard like it. Did ever people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as thou hast heard and lived? Or hath God essayed to go and take a nation from the midst of another nation, by temptations, by signs, and by wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by a stretched out arm, and by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? Unto thee it was showed, that thou mightest know that the Lord, he is God. There is none else beside him. Out of heaven he made thee to hear his voice, that he might instruct thee. And upon earth he showed thee his great fire. And thou heardest his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved thy fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them, and brought thee out in his sight with his mighty power out of Egypt, to drive out nations from before thee, greater and mightier than thou art, to bring thee in, to give thee their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, he is God in heaven above, and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. Thou shalt keep therefore his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee this day, that it may go well with thee, and with thy children after thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days upon the earth, which the Lord thy God giveth thee forever. Back to our lesson text. It says, as was said above, Moses reminds the people about how they arrived at this point in their lives. He tells Israel again about how God was active in their history. Moses further reminds the people that they heard the Lord speak and that they lived after hearing God's voice. He points out that God delivered Israel from bondage in Egypt. Moreover, Moses reiterates that the Lord fought battles for them and that he guided them into the promised land. Moses knew that Israel needed to become more familiar with the one who caused these things to happen. In Deuteronomy 4, verses 39 through 40, Moses tells the people to think about the Lord. He knows that contemplation on God should be an important part of the lives of the people of God. In reflecting on God, each person in the biblical community positions him or herself to see God as he is. In so doing, individuals in the biblical community position themselves to make good moral decisions and to live victoriously in the promised land. How does the situation in the text apply to us? How does seeing the Lord as he is bringing about victorious living in the contemporary world? The application says, 1. Contemplation on God positions the saints to see God in his highness. Meditation on the Lord positions the saints to behold God's highness. That is to say, it situates the people of God to appreciate him. In what does God's highness consist? 1. He is eternal. God exists outside of time. While we see things in stages and sequence, he sees it all simultaneously. While we await the future, he is already there. 2. God is without physical limitations. He has no spatial boundaries. While we can be in one place at a time, God is everywhere at the same time. 3. God is independent. His existence is not based upon anything else. Thus, if the entire universe were destroyed, or if people no longer existed, God would remain. Why? He is self-caused. 4. He is changeless. He undergoes neither improvement nor decay. There is no need for him to grow or mature. He is perfect. Moses thought about God, and he concluded, God is in heaven above and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. No doubt God is high. There is none like him. 2. Contemplation on God positions the saints to see God in his morality. Meditation on the Lord positions the saints to behold God's righteousness for humankind. God decided to create moral beings. He could have created people and made them robots. Instead, God chose to create people and to make them free moral agents. Free moral agency, the ability to choose and to be responsible for one's actions, is one characteristic of being a person. God permits such a situation because He is just. He does not force people to love Him. God created progressive, free-thinking, moral beings because He desires for us to want to live for Him. He refuses to constrain us to select what is true, honest, just, and pure. God is very ethical and He respects our will. 3. Contemplation on God positions the saints to see God in His process. Meditation on the Lord positions the saints to behold God's procedure for bringing into existence people who are good and who love Him. Although the blood of Jesus saves us from sin, it does not make us mature moral beings. The world is the arena where this occurs. Our present circumstances present opportunities for us to develop into good moral beings. The world, then, is preparation for a future world because it gives us the chance to grow and to become saints of the Most High God. Character emerges from living and dealing with the difficulties of life. This is God's way, for He refuses to make us fully grown, ethical individuals instantaneously. 4. Contemplation on God positions the saints to see God in His moral absoluteness. Meditation on the Lord positions the saints to behold God's relationship to moral truth. God is the ultimate underlying principle or ground of what is right and wrong. As it was said above, God is eternal and perfect. He is not affected by time and does not change. He has permanence. Moral truth is objectively real, and it is eternal. It grounds itself in God. Basing ideas about morality on something that is permanent and changeless is a good decision. Since time does not affect God and God is without change, it makes sense to ground our beliefs about right and wrong in Him. The procedure for bringing into existence people who are good and who love Him is part of the plan of God. People, therefore, need to have moral dilemmas, and they need to have a good basis for determining moral truth. As people habitually do the right things, they grow ethically and spiritually. Accordingly, they need to have situations that require them to pray, fast, and think ethically to establish a strong ethical belief system. Our lesson illustration. When it was launched in 1936, the Queen Mary was the largest ship to sail the oceans. Historically, it has been claimed that she sailed for over 40 years. After the ship was decommissioned, she became a restaurant. As the ship was being transformed into a place for dining, parts of the ship, which were brightly painted, simply began to crumble because the steel under the paint had weakened and began to break apart. The Queen Mary suffered a commonplace condition. Polished and attractive exteriors collapse if they are not supported by a strong underlying structure or substance. Similarly, our lives will deteriorate without a solid basis for moral decision making. And God is that foundation. Seeing Him as He is positions us to avoid this type of tragedy, for we can build our houses on a rock. The questions for today's lesson. Question 1. What things come to mind when we contemplate God in His highness? How easy or hard is it to lose sight of this aspect of God's nature? Question 2. In understanding God's process for developing His people, What challenges have you had in writing out the situation? Was there a turning point when you recognized that the process was simply a process and not a prison? Question 3. Why is it best that we ground our beliefs about right and wrong in God? Question 4. What challenges do we face when we are trying to line up with God's morality? Is God's morality easily understood? God bless you. And thank you for joining me today. Make sure to study the Word so you can answer the questions.